Russia and France were historic rivals of the United Kingdom, so the Brits joining the two in a war against Germany was for sure a historical plot twist. Germany's enemy was mainly France and later Russia, as France and Russia formed an official alliance in 1891 with the formation of the Duo Entente. Germany and the United Kingdom had the same enemies, so what if the United Kingdom worked with Germany to defeat their historic rivals of France and Russia? How could this change the Great War and history after? Does the Second World War even happen? I would answer all of these questions in this video. First up, why didn't Germany and Britain ally in the first place? As I said, they had the same enemies, and as you would later find out, had little conflicting areas of interest, making them actually the perfect allies. This is how the story goes. Joseph Chamberlain advocated for the Anglo-German Alliance. He is the father of Neville Chamberlain. Perhaps this explains why Neville Chamberlain was so soft on the ultranationalist Germans, as his father wanted to form an alliance between the two countries. There was an official proposal by the British in 1898 that they form a defensive alliance, which could potentially include the United States of America as well, but Germany refused this proposal. Otto von Bismarck wanted to ally with the British and came close several times, but Wilhelm II dismissed Otto von Bismarck in 1890, as Bismarck was a deep conservative, and Wilhelm II felt like Bismarck was only holding him back due to his outdated policies and worldviews. The fact is that prior to this, Otto von Bismarck and Lord Salisbury had held many talks regarding the possibility of an Anglo-German alliance, which could have happened had Bismarck not been dismissed. Wilhelm II was interviewed in the Daily Telegraph, where he basically called the British people mad for questioning his peaceful intentions, and further he said that the German populace was generally not friendly towards the English. Another mistake that Germany, or rather Wilhelm II, made was that he sent volunteers to Transvaal, which was fighting in the Second Boer War against the British. Wilhelm II wanted Transvaal to win and establish a protectorate over South Africa, but he was stopped from doing that. By that time, any hope of an alliance between Germany and the United Kingdom was long gone due to the actions of Wilhelm II. The British proposed this alliance many times. All Germany had to do was to accept, but Wilhelm II didn't trust the British, despite him being the grandson of Queen Victoria, and later George V and Wilhelm II, two cousins, would fight on opposing sides of the Great War. The final nail in the coffin for the Anglo-German Alliance was the naval arms race, where Germany had the largest army in Europe, so they sought to also have the largest navy and to overtake the British. This forced the British to get closer to France, forming the Entente Cordiale. Because of this, Britain and Russia finally stopped hating each other and in 1907 signed the Anglo-Russian Convention because of this new German threat. Britain dominated the world and sought to prevent any other country from taking the spotlight away. As such, the British foreign policy at the time was to act hostile to the country that could pose a threat to overtaking Britain, which, considering the actions of Wilhelm II, became Germany. What I'm getting from reading about the relations between the two countries is that Wilhelm II was the problem, and no alliance can exist when he is in charge. Wilhelm II didn't want to ally with Britain, as this would make any possibilities of a Russo-German alliance impossible. The Germans still had some hopes from getting Russia back on their side, as the two countries were allied in the League of the Three Emperors, but this alliance had failed twice. Maybe the Germans thought the third time is the charm. So, knowing these problems, how can we change the history to make sure that the Anglo-German Alliance is formed? In my opinion, the best way to do that would be to involve Frederick III. Let me explain. Frederick III was not only given military education, but also classical education as well, so he learned French and English, but also studying history, geography, religion, which contributed to his liberal worldviews. He married Princess Victoria, the daughter of Queen Victoria, and began to embrace British values for liberalism. The problem was that Frederick III only ruled Germany for 99 days, as he was a heavy smoker and died of cancer, so he could never influence his nation as he saw fit. In one famous incident, Wilhelm II had insulted his liberal father regarding his views on the Jews and the British, calling him a puppet of said people. After that, Wilhelm II came to power, and I already described the problems that this brought and why the Anglo-German Alliance could have never happened. I am not proposing that Frederick III somehow survived cancer and ruled Germany, but I have another proposal that I think is even better. I'm proposing that Frederick III reforms Germany with the little time that he has. Perhaps Wilhelm I dies slightly sooner, and Frederick III lives slightly longer. The goal is to have him rule Germany for about a year, rather than 99 days, which doesn't seem too insane and it's actually possible. Frederick III wanted to limit the power of the Chancellor, wanted to appoint liberal ministers, and wanted to introduce elements of the British Parliament into Germany. So what if he had enough time to do just that, and then would be succeeded by Wilhelm II? Franz Lorenz Müller famously said, if Frederick had reigned for longer, there would have been no Anglo-German rivalry, no Russo-French alliance, and consequently no Great War. So what if exactly this happened and Frederick III managed to reform Germany, making it more into a constitutional monarchy and politically looking similar to the United Kingdom, where Germany would have a parliament and be more democratic? Well, historically, Wilhelm II went against Otto von Bismarck's plans for concentrating on France, so the Germans spread out and made new enemies, which didn't work too well for them in the Great War. As I mentioned earlier, Otto von Bismarck was dismissed in 1890, so this could have changed that. In fact, I asked my audience regarding their opinion on Wilhelm II, and the results speak for itself. Comments read stuff like, he destroyed everything built by Wilhelm I and Bismarck. So Wilhelm II opposing Bismarck made him really unpopular with my community, and as with the power of hindsight, we know that this was a bad idea. Otto von Bismarck wanted to isolate France and weaken them over time, with the goal of preventing France from allying any other great powers. It is even possible that Bismarck is never dismissed if the reforms of Frederick go well. After all, Bismarck was the most popular figure in Germany, initially more popular than Wilhelm II himself. So the parliament could support Bismarck, resulting in him to stay in power and control foreign policy as he saw fit. After all, we're talking about the guy that literally united Germany and won a war against Austria and France. So nobody questioned the genius of Bismarck, except maybe Wilhelm II. Additionally, Frederick III was also really popular and he was remembered fondly after his death. He was a military genius and an honorable man, so most in Germany had favorable views towards him. Wilhelm II going against the legacy of Frederick III and popularity of Otto von Bismarck would be impossible, so Wilhelm II would be limited in terms of what he can actually do, but also Parliament would limit him further, which would have several changes. An Anglo-German alliance is pretty much guaranteed to happen at this point, as all Germany had to do was to accept one of the many proposals made by Britain. Britain's grip over their colonies was weakening, showcased in the Second Boer War, so them allying with Germany was sought after as to make sure that Germany doesn't steal said colonies, which Wilhelm II wanted to do as I mentioned earlier. But also both countries could dominate the world as they were arguably the two strongest countries in the world at the time. One had the largest and strongest navy, and the other had the largest and strongest land army. So if both were to form an official alliance, they could become unstoppable. This means that there wouldn't be a naval arms race, which is really important, as both Germany and the United Kingdom would have fewer ships, but still would rule the waves together. The thing is that if you want to rule the waves just like the United Kingdom, I suggest you try World of Warships, where you can choose from 500 warships from 13 nations, and engage in 12 vs 12 battles against real opponents. First up, the game is free to play and available on all consoles, with over 1 million active players. If you have never played it before, by registering for a new account and using code BRAVO, you will gain these rewards, enough to get you a couple of ships for free. Check out the link in the description to take advantage of this offer. World of Warships has the perfect balance between realism and entertainment, as the combat is quite interesting. My favorite thing to do is to get close to an enemy ship and spam them with torpedoes, guaranteeing that I would get the kill. In this clip I did this to separate times against a battleship. This is by far not the only way to play this game, as you have several classes like destroyers, cruisers, battleships, submarines and even aircraft carriers, each having different perks and mechanics. The ships are historically accurate. For example, I'm using the Danae, which has quite an interesting backstory. It was deployed in the Baltics in 1919, and this specific ship aided in the liberation of Latvia and Estonia. Further, this ship was also used during the Normandy landings, so it's worth getting this game just to read about all of the cool ships, but also you can play as them, which deeply interests me. I suggest that you check the link in the description to try this game out for free. Thanks to World of Warships for sponsoring this video. Now, let us continue. German and British spheres of influence conflicted in very few areas, but still this alliance would be more stable than the rest of the allies that Germany made in the coming years, all of which eventually abandoned Germany. For example, German and Austria-Hungary's alliance was kind of weird. Germany had interests in uniting the German speakers, which could include Austria and Bohemia, so this is one big conflict of interest. Further, Austria-Hungary had claims in southern Germany, which they used to dominate for centuries, so both countries allying despite this was kind of strange. Italy and Austria-Hungary also had conflicts of interest, as Austria generally wanted these lands, which they used to control, and Italy wanted these lands, which were Italian majority or had strategic importance to Italy, yet another conflict of interest, leading to Italy to abandon the Central Powers. I am trying to say that Britain and Germany had fewer conflicts of interest, mainly over Tanganyika, but had no important conflicts of interest in the European mainland. This is why I would predict that this alliance would be kind of stable, and even both countries can achieve their goals at the expense of their rivals, so this could be a win-win situation for Britain and Germany. I would predict that this could have happened around the year of 1890 or slightly later, but the exact year doesn't really matter. With that, history would be fundamentally changed, as the balance of power would be completely shifted. In the year of 1890, France and Russia were not allied yet, as they formally allied in 1894, but had signed several treaties of friendship 3 years prior in 1891. The strategy of Bismarck was to isolate France, prevent them from allying any other great power, which is basically either Russia or the Ottoman Empire, as Germany at that point would have allied the rest of the great powers themselves. With the Quadruple Alliance being the dominant force in Europe, the alliance between France and Russia would be prevented, as Germany would threaten war if this were to happen, and their allies would be happy to support them, as each would have something to gain out of it. Going back to what Franz Lorenz Müller said, so far he was right, as the Anglo-German Alliance has happened, with France and Russia being isolated, but would a Great War still happen? I just want you to know that this video is not too realistic after this point, as history would be fundamentally changed, with this dramatic shift in balance of power. Basically, the most powerful countries in the world would be allies. This would for sure butterfly history, so predicting anything would be impossible, so I would not even try to be accurate. Yet I want to entertain you with the best of my abilities. This means that history would be fundamentally changed, so predicting anything past this point would be impossible. Yet I want to follow what happened historically, as it serves as a guide, despite Britain being allied to the Germans. In 1898, something crucial would happen, which is the Fashoda Incident, where historically France and the United Kingdom almost went to war in our own history. I already made a video on this topic regarding what if the two went to war, and it was published about a year and a half ago, so I would not repeat myself. I would have Britain to win this border conflict quickly, like they did historically, so war would be avoided between the two countries. Perhaps France is not seen as a threat. It is even possible that the British public sympathizes with the French, as their brothers down south are isolated and forcefully kept down, but overall Britain is strongly allied with the Germans. So in 1898, war would be avoided and France and Russia are unlikely to have signed any official alliances. But I don't think that they have to. I think that France and Russia would come to a mutual understanding. If one country is invaded by the Quadruple Alliance, that the other must also join. If not, both countries would be forcefully kept down. So them trying their chances at fighting the Central Powers is their only option. As such, I expect France and Russia to pursue a more aggressive foreign policy and desperately try to align with more countries to their cause, which is to break the dominance of the Quadruple Alliance. The Russo-Japanese War of 1904 would still happen, and I believe that you're smart enough to know that Russia would for sure win this conflict against the inferior Japanese, right? Well, you already know the outcome, and that Russia would get humiliated by Japan, but there is a key detail in this war that could lead to the outbreak of the Great War. This is that Montenegro was technically also involved in the war, helping Russia out. The thing is that Montenegro and Japan never signed a peace treaty, so the two countries were at war and peace treaty was signed in 2006. No, I was just joking, but for real, the Dogger Bank incident of 1904 could have started the Great War, as Europe is even more tense in this alternate history. Basically, the Dogger Bank incident happened because Russia was fighting Japan, and they needed ships in the Pacific Ocean. As such, Russia gathered their ships in Europe and sent them to the Pacific, with the only problem that said ships, when they were near Britain, mistook British fishing trawlers for Japanese submarines. So they opened fire on the British, killing 2 fishermen and injuring 6. Historically, Britain didn't escalate this conflict too much, as they wanted to ally with Russia and to stand strong against the greater threat of Germany, which the British historically did in 1907 with the signing of the Anglo-Russian Convention, so 3 years after this incident. Relations between the two were at an all-time high, as they had just practically signed an alliance. This time Britain is allied with Germany and opposes France and Russia, their historic rivals, so the British may choose to escalate this conflict. What I can see happening is that this story would be printed in all British newspapers, rallying the people for war and fueling their hatred for the Russian people. While all of this would be ongoing, Russia would be effectively fighting Japan and losing hard on the front lines. Russia is in a terrible position by all means, and it doesn't help that Nicholas II is very incompetent. Russia not only lost the war to Japan, but also suffered domestic issues later, as the Russian Revolution of 1905 was initiated by Leon Trotsky. This revolution was mainly targeted against Nicholas II and the rest of the nobles, who were seen as incompetent and not knowing the problems of the common people anymore. The revolution wanted to oust Nicholas II from power and establish a republic that would have likely become communist. Historically, Nicholas II had to comply with the demands of the protesters and the Russian Duma was established, but this only happened when the revolution was starting to get out of hand. Reportedly, Nicholas II was more concerned about his son's illness and he was more interested in playing with dominoes rather than with dealing with the revolution. So, in this alternate history, in 1905 the Russian Revolution could end up looking very different than from the one we had in our own history. Firstly, Britain would escalate the Dogger Bank incident and demand that Russia pays abnormally high reparations to the British, which would further strain the Russian economy and humiliate the Russians, right after they were humiliated by the Japanese. This would encourage the Russian socialists to rise in stronger numbers, but then I would spice the video up. Historically, Germany had sent Lenin to Finland, with the goal of starting a Russian civil war and dropping them out of the Great War. In this alternate history, something similar could still happen. Don't get me wrong, Wilhelm II wouldn't make Russia socialist for any reason. In fact, if Russia or even France were to somehow become socialist, Germany would just invade them as to get rid of this ideology, likely making buffer states in the process. As I said, this video is unrealistic, so I want to make something really interesting. In this alternate history, Germany would send Lenin to Russia as to fuel the flames, hoping for a civil war in Russia to start and generally weaken his rival. If the communists were to win, then Germany would simply invade and take what they desire. If the Russian whites were to win, then Germany would invade a weaker Russia and still win. France and Russia would be in a really bad position due to the Quadruple Alliance. As you can see, this scenario is quickly becoming more and more unrealistic, and this is because predicting anything would be impossible. For example, we can assume that France and Russia would try to get the Ottoman Empire on their side, but Russia and the Ottoman Empire were historic rivals and had many conflicts of interest, including the Ottoman capital city, so this may not work out. Additionally, Germany is likely to invest in the Ottoman Empire and build the Baghdad to Berlin railway, so Germany would win the Ottomans over to their side with land promises and sheer economic superiority. This would butterfly the scenario greatly, as we can't ever know if the Italo-Turkish war would still happen, as now both countries would be official allies of Germany. There may be a peaceful solution, as the Ottoman Empire knew that they would lose Libya eventually, so they may choose to sell it to Italy, rather than to fight a war over it. If they choose to sell it and avoid war, does this mean that the First Balkan War never happens, as the Italians never weakened the Ottomans enough and gave the Balkan people confidence to rebel? Even if the First Balkan War happens, what about the Second Balkan War? Does it still happen, or does Bulgaria gain their desired land? It is impossible to know what these events would look like, with Britain allying Germany in 1890, hence I wouldn't even try, and I would start the Great War at 1905, when we can still make some realistic predictions. So, in this alternate history, Britain would ally Germany, due to the limited power of Wilhelm II, but this would be a brilliant move. France and Russia would be isolated and won't be able to ally any other major powers. As the Russians would quickly invade Japan and subsequently lose, they would accidentally engage the British in the Dogger Bank incident, creating a political crisis, but also Russia would suffer from a revolution. This I think is the best time for Germany and Britain to strike Russia. They just now lost the war to Japan and their capital is occupied by rebels. In addition, Britain has the perfect casus belli against Russia, so they can drag the rest of their allies into this war. France would join this war, hoping that they can somehow turn it around, or to get Italy to switch sides. If France sits idle, they would be next on the chopping block and Russia would be already gone. So France knows that their odds at victory are slim, but still need to act if they want to have any shot at global relevance. As for the Quadruple Alliance, they would be the aggressors and would catch their enemies off guard, when they're possibly at their lowest, so them initiating this war is the smartest and most logical thing to do for them right now. Italy and Austria-Hungary would still have conflicts of interest, but this wouldn't be important for now, as Italy would gain their desired French lands, while Austria-Hungary would consolidate the Balkans and likely to puppet Serbia, which was a Russian ally and an Austrian rival, so they're likely to join this war for the same reason as France. Basically, if Serbia stays out of this war, Russia is guaranteed to be defeated, so if this were to happen, Austria would later invade and conquer Serbia unopposed. This is why Serbia would also join this war, despite their slim odds. As Austria-Hungary would struggle against Serbia, Bulgaria is likely to join, where they could consolidate the Balkans in favor of the Central Powers. As for Germany, they may not choose to do the Schlieffen plan, as neither France nor Russia is a serious threat, so them invading Belgium just for the sake of it is unnecessary. Further, Britain has good relations with Belgium, so the British may encourage the Belgians to let the Germans pass through, which I would allow in this scenario. Considering how close the Germans came to capturing Paris in our own history, despite having to fight and occupy Belgium, this time France is also weaker, so I assume that Germany would like to capture Paris like they did in 1871, again humiliating France. The French are unlikely to surrender, as they would move their capital to Bordeaux and try to reconquer Paris. The French would call for the Russians to attack the German positions to the east, as to ease pressure off from France, but Russia would be too preoccupied as they would be dealing with their revolution as well. Even if Belgium doesn't join, Germany has no reason to invade them, as they are basically guaranteed to win this war regardless. Even Italy is in this conflict and is on the German side, and while they won't do too much and would sit idle on the mountainous front lines, they would still be occupying French manpower and resources. I assume that the Central Powers would focus on Russia, as France has already lost Paris. They would try to retake it, but when it fails, they may sue for peace. Russia on the other hand is a whole another beast, as they are large and Germany wants to establish buffer states there. As for the Russian Revolution, historically they got crushed and support for them ceased when Nicholas II accepted most of their demands, which I can see happening once again, so the communists wouldn't be a problem right away. The Central Powers would make solid advances and eventually Nicholas II would get deposed, with a provisional government being established, later leading to the eventual capitulation of Russia and France. As for the peace treaty, France would lose Nancy and a bit of bordering regions to Germany, but the thing is that these regions contained about 80% of the French coal and iron supplies, so France would be crippled and unable to pose a threat to Germany later. If Belgium is also in this war, they would get Dunkirk and Lille. Italy would get their claimed lands of Nice, Savoy, Corsica, Tunisia and Djibouti, leading to these borders in the European France. As for the French colonial empire, it would be partitioned among Britain and Germany, with the Germans creating some form of Middle Africa, while Britain would seize the French Caribbean. Most notably, Germany would get hold of French Indochina, which is likely to rebel and try to break free, but I assume that they won't be successful. Russia would depose Nicholas II, so Finland, that was tied to them with a personal union, would break free, with a German relative becoming a Finnish monarch, a fate that would also follow in Lithuania and Livonia, while Poland would be ruled by the Bulgarian Cyril I, and Ukraine would be ruled by the Austrian Archduke Wilhelm, also known as Vasily Vyshevani. Finally, Russia would also lose the Caucasus to the Ottoman Empire, finalizing their borders. In this alternate treaty of Brest-Litovsk, Russia would lose 37% of their population, half of their industrial capacity and about 90% of their coal fields, which, just like France, would prevent Russia from ever engaging in a war against Germany. As for Serbia and Montenegro, they would be partitioned among Austria-Hungary and Bulgaria, finalizing all of the border changes after the Great War, which I predict would last about 1.5 years. Germany would be the clear winner in this scenario, and they would have established continental dominance, so their alliance with the British may start to be questioned by both sides. The question now becomes, is there going to be a second world war in this universe, and if so, which side would win? First up, Japan never entered this war, but still I expect them to turn ultra-nationalist and attack China eventually, like they did in our own history. Russia is unlikely to go communist, as the communist revolution was already dealt with during the war, in addition to the threat of Germany invading Russia if they were to go down this path, so Russia would become deeply unstable and, considering their losses, would be reduced to a regional power. The Ottoman Empire would continue to be the sick man of Europe, and unfortunately they would do sick things to the Armenian population, so the Ottomans would continue their policy of doing exactly that, but also to other nationalities. They would resettle or eliminate minorities, making sure that the Turkish people are the majority in the Anatolian Peninsula, but also in the Balkan Peninsula, and later this would expand down south. Austria-Hungary would get to live for another day, but the fundamental problems in the multi-ethnic empire have not been resolved. In fact, they have gotten even worse. Austria-Hungary would be propped up by Germany for the time being, but I expect them to collapse eventually. If this were to happen, Germany would directly take the German-speaking lands, in addition to Bohemia, which could become a German protectorate. Hungary would get their independence, with all of their claimed lands, while Italy would take advantage of this to take their claimed lands from the Austrian portion. Illyria would be free, but be deeply unpopular within its people. Poland and Ukraine are likely going to expand into Galicia and split the region among themselves. Hungary would still remain a German ally, as nothing too much has changed with the collapse of Austria-Hungary. In fact, it may be a positive for Germany if this were to happen, as Italy would now become a more committed ally, as they would be promised Malta, Egypt, Sudan if they were to fight against the United Kingdom. As I said, I expect the British and Germans to seize their alliance, as it was only formed to combat the rivals of France and Russia, so this alliance would now become obsolete. I can definitely see Britain and Germany to become rivals once again, especially since Germany took so much from Russia. Maybe the United Kingdom realizes that they made a mistake allying with the Germans and making them stronger. Britain may choose to go down the path of the Imperial Federation, which they tried to do historically but were broke after the Great War, so this project was delayed. Then the Second World War happened and Britain was forced to decolonize after that, so this project never happened. But this time Britain is less devastated, as the war was shorter and more decisive, so I can see the Imperial Federation to get born, being united against the German influence. At that point there would be three major superpowers: Germany, the United Kingdom and the United States of America. As Germany and Britain would become the new rivals, if there is a war between the two, the side which the Americans join is likely to win the entire conflict. This can certainly go either way, as America, if they were to become an expansionist power, can certainly side with the Germans and take Canada, or they can continue the path of liberty and freedom, eventually siding with the British against Germany. I don't know if a Second World War would even happen, as everything has changed drastically already. There is no ultranationalism in Europe, and the German alliance is very strong and united. So, ironically, if anybody starts a war, it has to be the United Kingdom, which they are not likely to do without a solid reason. Germany is unlikely to start a world war and risk their gains. Remember, France and Russia have lost about 85% of their steel production, so them producing tanks, airplanes and rifles on a mass scale would be impossible, so they cannot hope to overtake the Germans, and are likely going to remain silent for the time being and focus on internal affairs. But as I said earlier, I think that only Britain is in a position to initiate a world war, and they are unlikely to do that, so perhaps another massive war never happens. The interesting thing is that this universe looks like the Kaisertum series I did a while ago, based on Germany winning the First World War, but in an alternate way. You can check out the full 3-hour movie if the topic interests you, where I cover the interwar period and a potential Second World War. Thank you for watching and I hope to see you there. Goodbye.